Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arleth. As always, it's your one-stop shop to take stock of all the progress on the political and literal battlefields in Ukraine. Now let's go ahead and get started with the most important stories of the week. Russian attacks have exacted a heavy toll on Ukrainian civilians this week. Dozens of people have been killed, and even more have been wounded.
This is the aftermath of an overnight drone attack on Kyiv. Head of the local military administration, Gary Tabach, said more than a dozen attack drones were spotted over the city, most of which were shot down. Around 20 cars and a gas pipe in the residential area were damaged in the hours-long strike. Debris was also found in a children's playground. Many such attacks took place across the country, destroying residential areas and taking the lives of citizens.
In June, the Netherlands announced its commitment to bolster Ukraine's air defense by supplying radar and launch components. Initially, the Dutch government identified an unnamed country to provide additional necessary parts to complete the system. However, recent reports indicate that this unnamed country has withdrawn from the agreement.
The Netherlands stands by Ukraine.
In a recent interview, the country's defense minister Ruben Brecklemans said that the Netherlands is actively seeking alternative elements to finalize the air defense system. He noted there were several countries that were eager to help Ukraine, emphasizing the collective effort despite encountering challenges that hinder the system's assembly. The minister also confirmed that the Netherlands has already delivered a radar system to Kyiv and that 3 launchers are expected to arrive very soon. As Russia intensifies its strikes against Ukrainian cities and energy infrastructure, Kyiv continues to urge its allies for additional air defense assets. To date, Ukraine has received at least 3 Patriot systems from Germany and 1 from the United States, along with individual launchers and missiles from other nations, including the Netherlands and Spain. Both the US and the Netherlands pledged to deliver 1 additional system each in June, while Romania's transfer of a Patriot system was approved in early September.
The Danish government has announced a significant financial commitment of almost $20 million to aid in the restoration of Ukraine's energy infrastructure, devastated by recent Russian attacks. This announcement was made by the Danish Energy Ministry during the G7 meeting focused on Ukraine's energy security in New York.
Between March and August, Russia conducted 9 coordinated attacks on Ukraine's power infrastructure, impacting facilities across 20 regions. The International Energy Agency has warned that Ukraine could face an electricity shortage of up to 6 gigawatts this winter, which represents about 1/3 of the expected peak demand. Danish Energy Minister Lars Agard emphasized the urgency of the situation, stating that Russia was violating the rules of war with its massive attacks on Ukraine's electricity and heat supply system. He highlighted the plight of Ukrainian citizens, who may be left without heat and electricity as winter approaches. The allocated funds will be utilized for emergency measures and to procure essential equipment and spare parts to bolster Ukraine's energy security. This contribution is one of the largest Denmark has ever made to support Ukraine, reflecting the country's ongoing commitment to assist in the face of adversity.
And now it's that time to look at the war in Ukraine through the lens of a journalist. And for that, I'm now joined by our TVP world correspondent, Oz Chatterjee, who's currently in Kyiv. Hello, Oz, and thanks for joining us on Ukraine This Week. Now, Oz, I have to ask you, because this was not going to happen. This is, they were going to meet, they weren't going to meet. They were supposed to meet in Mar-a-Lago. President Zelenskyy didn't like the venue. He didn't want to take sides. But then finally, the proposition was to meet with Donald Trump in New York City. And apparently that meeting took place on Friday. So what can you tell us about the latest media reports from this meeting?
Well, we have to kind of put this all in context for a bit. Firstly, this meeting was planned from the start. Zelenskyy planned to meet both Harris and Trump, both candidates, major candidates for the presidency. And that was scheduled from the beginning. We reported on it earlier on, saying this is what Zelenskyy planned to do. However, when he got there, Speaker Mike Johnson refused to meet him, and Trump initially refused to meet him. Meanwhile, Zelenskyy went to a factory in Pennsylvania where they've been making shells alongside the governor for Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. And doing that press conference caused a huge amount of outrage on the right in America, which has also sort of preceded this meeting, which has now happened. And the press conferences that they've given have been really rather awkward. Now, it must be said, we understand why Zelenskyy is reaching out to Trump and Harris. If Trump wins the presidency, then he will be setting Ukraine policy from the White House. However, Trump made some very, very incendiary remarks the day before Zelenskyy and Trump met, saying how Ukraine was lost and that Zelenskyy was refusing to sign a deal. His tone changed in that meeting on Friday in these awkward exchanges with the camera, in which he said he had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin, to which Zelenskyy interrupted and said, well, I hope we would have better relations. And Trump said, haha, oh, I see. So again, a very awkward interaction between both of them. But it just goes to show how difficult the White House could be for Zelenskyy, for Kyiv, going forward if Donald Trump wins and is sworn in January 2025.
Indeed, it is very awkward. Donald Trump releasing the letter that, President Zelenskyy sent to Donald Trump requesting a meeting, putting that out on social media. Were there any other positive signs? Are there any positive takeaways from this meeting, would you say?
I think the positive from Kyiv's perspective is that they are preparing and laying groundwork for worst-case scenarios. Zelenskyy knows that what Donald Trump is saying is nonsense. I think most of the Republican Party probably knows what Donald Trump is saying is nonsense about how easy it would be to strike a deal between him and Putin. These deals mean concessions. That's what Kamala Harris was saying herself. So I really do think what Trump says and what Trump is able to do needs to be heavily distinguished. And just because Trump is saying something doesn't mean that even if he becomes president, he'll be able to put any of it into action. What is a threat to Ukraine is if Donald Trump removes aid from Ukraine. So they are going to be hoping that they can keep those lines open if the worst case happens for them and a Democrat does not return to the White House in November.
Certainly. Well, actions will definitely speak louder than words. Oz Chatterjee joining us from Kyiv. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And now joining me here to discuss the situation along the front lines and, of course, in the town of Volodymyr is Gary Tabach, former chief of staff at the NATO Military Liaison Mission in Moscow. Hello, Gary, and thank you very much for joining us on Ukraine this week.
Hello, Don. It's always great to be on TVP.
Now, looking at the situation near Volodymyr, I was actually there about a year and a half ago for the Battle of Volodymyr, what some people were then describing as the biggest tank battle since World War II. And the situation was very much in favor of the Ukrainians. If you're familiar with the situation there, how the town is located, it's on the high ground. It controls the commanding heights to the south, right? So it gives the Ukrainians a huge military advantage, especially when mechanized attacks and waves are coming from the south and from the Russian side. So what is the situation currently like there that we're seeing, and has Ukraine taken a little bit of its forces off the line there, and is that causing a problem?
Well, I mean, Ukrainians are getting exhausted, and you're right. I remember when you were there and I was watching your report. I remember very clearly when our Bradley got hit by the Russian missiles twice, and the crew were able to escape. It just showed how great our armored personnel carriers and are. The Bradleys, and but the thing is that the Ukrainians have been dug in there for such a long time. And it has become a war of attrition. So Russians keep sending troops, and they're using glided bombs that are 3-5 tons, I hear now. So it is very hard to withstand that, considering that Ukrainians lack enough of anti-aircraft artillery and missiles. And the Ukrainians are getting exhausted. So how long can you continue and fight? This is a World War I. type of fighting going on, but Ukrainians realize the importance of that town. I know in the West we don't talk about it as much as Mariupol and other towns or Bakhmut, but this is just as important, maybe even more important, because Ukrainian troops may end up encircled in it and get caught in that terrible situation. But again, this is going on for a very long time. So you can't help but to realize that Ukrainians are outnumbered, simply outnumbered. And how much longer will they be able to withstand that without Western help, without Western weaponry? Apparently today, United States, the White House announced that we will provide more weapons and release the $6 billion that have been approved by Congress for a long time. So let's keep our fingers crossed that this time the promise will come true. But again, without a Western help, without us getting engaged in this, Ukrainians will not be able to hold on for too long.
Well, and looking at this week, I mean, I think we went into this week very optimistic, very hopeful that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy would travel there to New York and to the United States and garner mass support for his four-point victory plan. But here we are sitting today, and it's not looking so good now, is it? We do have this almost $8 billion support package from the United States. This is going to allow Ukraine to kind of stay in the fight till the end of the year, giving them some more Patriot missiles and battery and extra battery. But we're still short as far as political will is concerned. And it looks like actually political will is not on Ukraine's side at the moment. What is Ukraine going to have to look at doing over the next couple months? Because obviously President Zelenskyy wasn't able to convince his Western allies.
You're absolutely done. Very unfortunate. Everybody were expecting it. But again, Ukraine somehow, again, I'm not a politician, but Ukraine somehow became a hostage of our United States politics. And it's taken hostage. And unfortunately, it is the current administration. Again, yes, they have promised and the Patriot missiles, and they promised the long-range missiles, and they've promised that $6 billion or $9 billion. I'm already confused how many billions here and there that's going on. But again, those promises have been made before, but the deliveries have not been made. So hopefully, maybe with some international pressure, with some pressure before the elections in the United States, it will be delivered. I mean, that's the only hope that we have for now, and then wait and see how our elections will turn out. Again, a lot of it depends on that. So hopefully, Ukrainians will be able to hold on a little longer. But again, if that will remain the way it is now, that war by attritions, Ukrainians will not be able to hold on to it, because the force against them is just much greater. And it's not just the weaponry, it's the sanctions, it's the political pressure, it's the informational war, it's the diplomatic war that's supposed to be going on. For somehow the Western countries and NATO is not able to collect itself together as we have done in World War II, and assist to defeat that evil that is infecting, that is killing so many of people who are trying to defend their land.
Well, I think we can talk about the political will and the lack thereof. Despite what the political rhetoric is, it's a very different situation in reality. Obviously, these politicians aren't walking the walk. They're talking the talk, but not walking the walk. And I think we can talk about this till we're blue in the face. But Gary, I'm going to ask you a very difficult question, and that is Ukraine's decision to shift its forces and go into the Kursk region. This has been successful by many measures, but I think there's consensus that a lot of what it was meant to do was to draw forces away from other places on the front lines in eastern Ukraine, especially around the Pokrovsk area. Who knows, maybe even the situation in the Kharkiv region along the border. If we look at deep state maps, we don't see any territorial changes there. We don't see a push forward by the Ukrainians. In fact, we see the exact opposite, and we see the Ukrainians losing ground all the way up north from Kupiansk, all the way down to Volodymyr. So the difficult question, Gary, is this working out for Ukraine occupying the Kursk region and using its forces there?
It is a difficult question. It all, again, I think it is a political question. I think that they have only so much of military resources that they have to spread around on a huge front. Front is almost as large as it was during World War II. So, but Ukrainians simply do not have enough of equipment and enough of people and trained people to do so, especially after such a long entrenched war. And this war is changing. It's changing from World War I type of it. Trenches war and armor war to a drone war. So now whoever has more drones, whoever has more anti-aircraft weapons, those are the ones that have the ability to fight this war in a more modern way. But again, the Kursk region, I think this is a question to politicians and diplomats, but in my humble opinion, I think it is very important, because if there are going to be negotiations, this is the ace in the deck, in the hand that the Ukrainians have. Because prior to that, Putin kept insisting that let's have negotiations, let's stop at the front line, and this is where a ceasefire is going to happen, kind of a 38th parallel in Korea. But now he's not willing to do it, because the front moved inside of Russia, and so now the front line is inside of Russia. So this is some sort of a negotiation point that the Ukrainians may trying to hold on to at the very in a very expensive way in lives and equipment. But again, expecting for Ukrainians to push forward is I think is unreasonable, because they have nothing to push forward with. They don't have enough men, and they do not have enough equipment to do so. They do not have air cover, or not even mentioning air superiority in a way to conduct an offensive operation.
And there's still the lack of the decision by the West to allow Ukraine to strike targets further into Russia. Yeah, so what does Ukraine do right now? I mean, obviously they can't count on the West, so do they need to expedite their own, what we've seen, these hybrid drone rocket systems that have quite a decent range on them. And it looks like Ukraine's actually even used them a few times. Maybe this is where the Ukrainian defense industry needs to go and ramp up its own production of those specific types of weapons to hit long-range targets.
Don, you're absolutely correct, 100%. The thing is that we keep promising that we're going to deliver this and that and this and that, but when Ukrainians ask, well, can we use it deep inside of a Russian territory? We say, no, you can't use it deep inside of Russian territory. Not that. You can fight, but not on the Russian territory, which is ridiculous. You can't fight a war like that. So what is for Ukrainians to do in these situations? It is another difficult question for me to answer. But I think we have precedents. We have a precedent in Israel. So Israelis also cannot fight. They don't have a fair fight. They can't, collateral damage. If they cause collateral damage, it's deadly. The world does. The world does not accept if Israelis will, God forbid, hurt some civilian that Hamas hiding among them and things like. They would blame Israel, not Hamas. So Israelis came up with the pagers. I mean, it's like from a movie. It's like from a Hollywood movie with the pagers and the walkie-talkies and things like that to fight the terrorists and to fight that much bigger force than what they are. Ukrainians are also doing it's almost like they're competing with each other. Ukrainians just were able to reach deep into the Russian territory and blow up their ammunition depots. How did they do that? That is, how did the Israelis do that with the pages? How did the Ukrainians do that with the depots? So it's not going to, it's a very, very asymmetrical warfare that they will have to conduct. They have to be very creative in fighting this war. And Ukrainians, I think, doing a very, very job coming up with that creativity. I mean, look, they blew up huge munition teapots that have been seen from satellites. Yeah. It's like a nuclear state for the mushrooms. So that had to be precise. That had to be coordinated. That is a great job that the Ukrainians do. And probably they will have to continue to do it until the West will wake up and realize that, you know, we need to support those countries that are holding, preventing us from World War III, trying to pay a huge price with it.
Yeah, CIA Director Burns said that actually the Kremlin is trying to make the West, impose its own red lines on itself by increasing their bellicose nuclear rhetoric as far as redrawing the new nuclear doctrine. And I think that that's probably a good trick in Moscow's sleeve that they are definitely using, and I'm worried about the impact that it'll have on the West. Do you think a lot of people in the United States are going to be fooled by this latest ploy that somehow Russia is going to attack the United States because it's supplying weapons to Ukraine, who then attack Russian territory?
Well, there are three things. One is that Ambassador Bolton, who used to be an advisor on national security to President Trump, said that the Russians are bluffing. And by the way, he's not a fan of President Trump. But just in case if anybody thinks that it's political, I think this guy is telling the truth. Two, the Russians have tried their Sarmat missile that is supposed to be the most threatening missile that they have now, that is on active service, the ballistic missile that will deliver a nuclear charge to the United States. But they have tried 6 tests, and all 6 tests have failed. And recently one blew up right inside of a silo, or right when it was deploying from a silo, not clear on that. But meanwhile, it's a disaster. So whatever they're trying to threaten us with is not really working so far. But another point is that I think we, as the Western world, especially the United States, we cannot have some tyrant, some crazy dictator hold us hostage or blackmail us with a nuclear weapon. Because if we're going to give into it, then we might as well give up and say, okay, well, whoever has a nuclear weapon, we should just give up because God forbid they'll use it. You know, we may have something anti-nuclear, just like Israelis. Who knew that they had something with those pagers? Maybe we have something like that will destroy, and maybe that's why their Sarmat, you know, that best missile in the world, is not flying.
Yeah, well, I've seen some good memes with Budanov, questioning whether Russians use pagers, but that's an entirely different issue. At the same time, I think, China and India purportedly have said that if there's any nuclear exchange on Russia's behalf, then they will definitely not follow behind. So I think in most circles, they're discounting the use of nuclear weapons, and I don't think that that's something that we should fear. Well, Gary Tabach, former Chief of Staff, NATO Military Liaison Mission in Moscow. It's always a pleasure having you on, and thanks for joining us on Ukraine this week.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Washington's support for Ukraine remains quote-unquote unwavering as the U.S. President Joe Biden has pledged $7.9 billion worth of military aid to Kyiv, a day after announcing $375 million for the same cause. Now, this wave of support comes amidst Moscow's intensified nuclear threats. Moscow is hoping that the West imposes self-deterrence in supplying weapons and permission to strike Russian territory.
During his visit to the US, Volodymyr Zelenskyy managed to secure more billions of dollars of aid for his army. $7.9 billion of the total sum is part of a larger package approved by Congress in April this year. All of that money will be spent on additional ammunition, weapons, and most importantly, air defense systems and munitions, crucial to ensuring Ukrainian skies remain safe. Volodymyr Zelenskyy's trip to the US also has another objective, pitching his victory plan to President Joe Biden, a plan to end the war in Ukraine without a full capitulation to Moscow.
It's important for us that all these people can understand us, understand that Ukraine wants to end this war more than anyone in the world.
While Zelensky's visit seemed like a success on the surface, its consequences might not be visible until a new leader moves into the White House. The president met with Kamala Harris, who underlined her support for Ukraine's peace plan.
As I have made clear on our 6 previous meetings and throughout Putin's brutal aggression and war against Ukraine, my support for the people of Ukraine is unwavering.
Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump initially refused to meet with the Ukrainian president.
Well, thank you very much. But I look forward to seeing him tomorrow. We'll see. I do believe I disagree with him. Well, he doesn't know me, but I disagree. But I will say this. I believe I will be able to make a deal between President Putin and President Zelensky quite quickly.
Many in Kyiv wonder if Washington's support for Ukraine will remain as staunch if Donald Trump wins the election in November. The former president suggested that if he was elected, he was very likely to cut aid to Ukraine to end the war.
Whether this will then actually end the war is another question, but he apparently does not want to exert more pressure on Russia. But instead on the victim, on Ukraine, and make basically Ukraine capitulate.
With Russia's nuclear threats ramping up, Volodymyr Zelenskyy might encounter difficulties in securing one more crucial declaration while he's still in the US: the permission to use Washington's long-range weaponry on targets inside Russia.
Of civilians to neighboring countries.
And now joining me to discuss President Zelensky's recent trip to the United States and his impressive or unimpressive efforts to garner as much support as possible for Ukraine while he was there with world leaders is Olexiy Haran, Comparative Politics professor at University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Hello, sir, and thank you very much for joining me on Ukraine This Week.
Thank you for the invitation.
Now, looking, I was observing that at the beginning of this week, we were very, very hopeful. I'm sure there in Ukraine, I know here in Poland, we're very hopeful that President Zelenskyy would make it to the United States for the General Assembly meetings, meet with world leaders, meet with President Joe Biden, and disclose his 4-point victory plan and garner as much support as he possibly can to get Kyiv in such a position that it can actually contemplate having talks with Russia. But now we sit in a very different place. How would you evaluate this week and President Zelensky's trip to the United States?
Well, I would say that it was very intensive because of different contacts with leaders of different states, with several speeches. Everybody is talking about his peace plan, but basically nobody knows what are the details. And perhaps it's important not to discuss publicly some military things. We basically know what President Zelenskyy is asking for. He's asking for continuous Western support, economic sanctions, weapons, possibilities to strike targets inside Russia, and even, this kind of promise to invite Ukraine to NATO. But I would say that experts in Ukraine didn't have, over-exaggerated expectations. Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Basically, what you mentioned, that President Biden promised additional supports, very concrete figures, and this is very good. Definitely, it's very, very important. But as you also mentioned, there was no decision on the use of American weapons deep inside Russia. Basically, we are talking about middle-range missile systems. And I think that we didn't expect, basically, that President Biden would say that, okay, I'm gonna invite Ukraine to NATO, or Kamala Harris, when she is elected, will invite Ukraine to NATO, because everything is concentrated about who will win the race. Okay, and in this situation, it's very important, for Biden and for Kamala Harris not to make things that would be used potentially by Republicans against Kamala Harris. So that's why,
that's a great point that you make. Do you think President Zelensky should have expected that basically it's kind of a dead political period right now as far as engaging the United States, because we're in the midst of an election that nobody knows who's going to win. Right now, according to the polls, I mean, this is pretty much a coin toss. And so maybe the timing for President Zelensky going to the United States and trying to push for this victory plan, maybe it wasn't the best timing.
Look, first of all, as I have mentioned, President Biden, made some important decision to increase support in weapons for Ukraine. But I think it's also good that Zelensky is meeting with both candidates, and we saw the drama, with Trump. Trump refused to meet, then he agreed to meet. So finally, the meeting was held today, and I think this is good. This is good. So because it's very important for Ukraine to have good bipartisan relations with the candidates, and we saw that some Republicans, they wanted to use it also against Biden and Trump, and they blamed Zelensky for visit to Pennsylvania, to the military factories there, because they thought that it would help Democrats to win in this state. But finally, again, and Speaker Johnson also, he refused to meet with Zelensky and accused the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S., in supporting Democrats. But at the end of the day, there was a meeting with Trump, and I think Trump actually changed his rhetoric. So again, we don't know what would happen if Trump is elected, not only regarding Ukraine, but actually regarding almost every country in the world, because his policy is very, very unpredictable. But I think it's important that Zelensky met with both with leaders of Democrats and with Trump.
So Joe Biden, he didn't give permission to use long-range weapons again on Russian territory. We were hoping that this would be
not long range; it's actually middle range.
Medium range, okay. Well, to strike targets deeper in Russia. And let me just highlight that these are the exact locations where the attacks against Ukraine are originating. So this makes every legal and military sense to indeed hit these targets. So we didn't get that. But President Biden did say something that he didn't necessarily say any time before, not at least that I recall, and that is that we need to support Ukraine to win the war. To actually win the war. He used that phrase. So I'm wondering, is this just rhetoric? Is this something that we should pay attention to? Or is this a changing perception of the administration? And if Kamala Harris wins, well, maybe she will take that same line of thought.
We don't know, actually. Definitely it's very important statement, and but the end of we are at the end of the presidency of Biden, and I expect that Kamala, if she is elected, she will, at the very beginning at least, she will take a quite cautious, approach, because it's with any newcomer for presidential position at the beginning, because they need to analyze, they need to see, they need to build the team, and then to actually develop alliance. So we cannot say for sure what will be taken by Kamala. I would say that definitely Democrats are more predictable than Trump. We'll see. It's so many factors, which are influencing the situation. I think for the time being, actually, Putin was quite effective in nuclear blackmailing of the West. It was at the beginning of the war. It's right now, but we see also that Western support is increasing. So, but there should be much more. So we'll see, you know.
President Zelenskyy also said this several times, said this in the General Assembly. He said it to the Security Council, and I believe he said it to all the world leaders that he met with while he was in the United States. And that is that Ukraine seeks a just and lasting peace. And I know that this may be premature, and I know it has been premature in the past, and not a lot of people in Ukraine like to talk about this, but for the first time, we're also hearing signals that there's contemplation about potentially, if we're going to end this war through a negotiated settlement, then maybe Ukraine won't be able to hold on to all of its territory that the Russians currently occupy. And I guess the question is this, and that is, I believe that without security guarantees, serious security guarantees that far surpass what was in the Budapest Memorandum, they absolutely have to be. So if Russia and Ukraine can come to an agreement, would Ukraine, do you think, be willing to potentially give up some of its land in the event that they would join NATO? In the event that Ukraine would immediately join NATO?
Well, first of all, we still don't have invitation from NATO, okay? And we know who is blocking it. Unfortunately, these are the US and Germany, you know, key countries here. So we don't have this obligation or even invitation to join NATO in some future. Secondly, regarding the negotiations, well, I think negotiations are possible theoretically, but in the situations that Ukraine is not weak, but Ukraine is strong, okay? There could be even maybe some freeze, but temporary. And I think no Ukrainian leader, no Ukrainian politician would recognize that we lost the territories at official level. No, definitely, because it would destabilize domestic situation in Ukraine. It's not just, actually.
It would destabilize the international order as well.
Yeah, that's right. So it's not just, it will show, again, it was mentioned previously that, you know, any nuclear type aggressor, he can blackmail other states, take part of the states, and keep them. So there are many ifs, but again, there is possibility, I think, now, Ukraine is started to talk that, okay, we are ready for negotiations, but on what
Russia says they're not.
Russia says no.
Russia says no.
Yeah.
And there was also supposed to be the second edition of the Switzerland Peace Summit, either in October. I've heard it being kicked down the road to potentially November. But so far, the Russians will not accept to sit down at the table.
Correct. And they would like to have to promote Chinese-Brazilian peace plan, because this plan doesn't say a word about withdrawal of Russian soldiers from Ukrainian territory and keeping territorial integrity of Ukraine. Moreover, in this document, it's Ukrainian crisis. Guys, it's Ukrainian crisis. It's not a war. It's Ukrainian crisis. So definitely Russia would try to use some alternative formats, you know, to what Zelenskyy is doing with this global peace summits. So this diplomatic struggle will continue.
And continue it will. Well, Olexiy Haran, Comparative Politics professor at the University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, thank you very much for joining me this week and discussing and sharing your thoughts. Appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękuję. And that's all on this edition of Ukraine This Week. Join us again next week for another summary of all the latest events from the war in Ukraine. Thanks for watching, and see you soon. Goodbye.